Madison Square Garden is one of those buildings where the name almost became bigger than the building itself. In New York, it is just the Garden. For the Knicks, it is the stage every era eventually gets measured against. For the Rangers, it is one of hockey's most recognizable homes. For boxing, concerts, college basketball, wrestling, political events, and major entertainment, it has been one of the busiest rooms in the world for decades. And right now, the timing around Madison Square Garden is even more interesting because the New York Knicks are back in the NBA Finals. As of June 3, 2026, the 2026 NBA Finals are scheduled to begin with the Knicks facing the San Antonio Spurs. Game 1 and Game 2 are in San Antonio, while Game 3 is scheduled for Madison Square Garden on June 8th, followed by Game 4 at MSG on June 10th. Anything beyond that depends on how the series plays out. So for now, the safe thing to say is that Madison Square Garden is set to host NBA Finals basketball again, and that alone is a huge moment for the building. The Knicks have not won an NBA championship since 1973, and their last finals appearance before this run came in 1999, also against the Spurs. So even without guessing what happens next, the current championship picture adds a different kind of weight to this arena. Madison Square Garden has already seen championship banners, playoff collapses, massive nights, and long stretches of frustration. But when the Knicks are relevant in June, the building becomes a national story again. To understand why that matters, you have to go back much further than the current arena. The name Madison Square Garden has been used by 4 different venues. The original versions were actually located near Madison Square, around East 26th Street and Madison Avenue. That is where the name came from. The current arena, however, is not on Madison Square at all. It sits in Midtown Manhattan, between 31st and 33rd Streets, and between 7th and 8th Avenues, directly above Pennsylvania Station. The current Madison Square Garden opened on February 11, 1968. It was built as part of the larger Pennsylvania Plaza complex, replacing the previous garden that had stood at 8th Avenue and 50th Street from 1925 to 1968. That third garden was famous in its own right, especially for boxing and events during the middle of the 20th century. But by the 1960s, New York was changing, and the city's sports and entertainment business wanted a newer, larger, more modern arena. The problem is that building the current garden came with one of the most controversial trade-offs in New York architectural history. To make way for the new complex, the old Pennsylvania Station was demolished. The original Penn Station, opened in 1910, was considered one of the great railway buildings in the United States. Its demolition became a turning point in New York preservation history, helping energize the movement that later protected landmarks like Grand Central Terminal. So Madison Square Garden has always had 2 identities. On one hand, it is one of the most famous arenas ever built. On the other, it sits on top of a transportation wound New York has never fully stopped arguing about. Architecturally, the current garden is very different from many modern arenas. Newer arenas often announce themselves with glass facades, sweeping exterior forms, and large public plazas. MSG is more compact, more enclosed, and more urban. It is squeezed into one of the densest parts of Manhattan, stacked above a train station, surrounded by office buildings, subway entrances, traffic, and thousands of people moving through the area every hour. That location is both its greatest strength and one of its biggest weaknesses. As a sports venue, Madison Square Garden has almost unmatched access. Fans can arrive by subway, commuter rail, Amtrak, bus, taxi, or simply by walking through Midtown. Penn Station sits underneath it, with Long Island Railroad, New J Transit, Amtrak, and subway connections all feeding the area. For an arena, that is a massive advantage. You can attend a Knicks game or Rangers game without needing a car, without needing a giant parking lot, and without the building sitting on the edge of the city. But that same placement creates major complications. Penn Station is one of the busiest rail hubs in North America, and for years, planners, politicians, transit advocates, and architects have argued that Madison Square Garden limits what can be done underneath it. The arena's structure sits above the station, making any major rebuilding project more difficult. That is why MSG's future has become a public debate, not just a sports discussion. In 2023, the New York City Council approved a new 5-year special permit allowing Madison Square Garden to continue operating above Penn Station. That was notable because MSG had pushed for a longer-term arrangement, while city officials wanted more leverage around the future of Penn Station. The 5-year permit keeps the building operating, but it also keeps pressure on all sides to figure out what the next version of this area should look like. That is one of the strange things about Madison Square Garden. It feels permanent because of the history attached to it, but politically and urbanistically, its future is always being questioned. Inside the arena, the building has changed dramatically from what opened in 1968. The Garden went through a major renovation from 1989 to 1991, and then an even larger transformation from 2011 to 2013. That second project is the one that shaped the MSG fans know today. It was a self-funded renovation, reported at around $1 billion, completed over 3 off-seasons, so the Knicks and Rangers could keep playing there during the regular seasons. That renovation was not cosmetic. It rebuilt major parts of the fan experience. The lower bowl was changed with new seating, concourses were expanded, premium spaces were rebuilt, locker rooms were upgraded, food and beverage areas were modernized. The arena received new lighting, video boards, clubs, suites, and a redesigned entrance on 7th Avenue called Chase Square. One of the most talked about additions was the Chase Bridges. These are suspended seating bridges high above the arena bowl, giving fans a rare overhead view of the court or ice. They are one of the more distinctive features of the renovated Garden. Some fans love the view because it feels unlike almost anywhere else in sports. Others criticize parts of the upper-level experience because the bridges can affect certain sightlines depending on where you sit. Either way, they became part of the modern MSG identity. The renovation also restored and emphasized parts of the arena's history. MSG added displays, historic corridors, and visual references to the building's earlier eras. That was important because the Garden does not have the same traditional beauty as an old ballpark, and it does not have the futuristic look of a new arena. Its value is more about memory, location, and atmosphere. The renovation leaned into that instead of trying to make the building feel like a completely new arena somewhere else. For basketball, Madison Square Garden currently seats about 19,812. For hockey, the number is about 18,006. Concert configurations can go higher, depending on staging. Those numbers put it in the normal range for major North American arenas, but the building's reputation makes it feel larger than its capacity. For the Knicks, Madison Square Garden has been home since 1968. That means every major modern Knicks era has passed through this version of the building. Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, Earl Monroe, Patrick Ewing, John Starks, Allen Houston, Carmelo Anthony, Jalen Brunson, and now this current finals team all connect back to the same arena name. The 1970 and 1973 championship teams are still central to Knicks history. The 1970 NBA Finals produced one of the most famous MSG moments ever, when Willis Reed walked onto the court for Game 7 against the Los Angeles Lakers after suffering a leg injury. Reed scored only the first 2 baskets, but the emotional lift became part of NBA mythology. The Knicks won that night, and Madison Square Garden became permanently tied to one of the league's defining championship images. The 1990s brought a different type of Garden identity. Those Knicks teams under Pat Riley and later Jeff Van Gundy were physical, defensive, and built for the kind of playoff basketball that made the building loud in a very specific way. Patrick Ewing became the face of that era. The Knicks reached the 1994 NBA Finals, losing to the Houston Rockets in 7 games, and then made another finals run in 1999 as an 8th seed before losing to the San Antonio Spurs. That 1999 matchup is especially relevant now because the 2026 finals are again Knicks versus Spurs. But the situations are completely different. In 1999, the NBA was coming out of a lockout-shortened season, and the Spurs were led by Tim Duncan and David Robinson. In 2026, the Spurs are built around a newer generation, while the Knicks are trying to end one of the longest championship droughts attached to a major market NBA team. For the Rangers, Madison Square Garden is just as important. The team has played there since the current building opened, and the 1994 Stanley Cup remains one of the biggest nights in arena history. When the Rangers beat the Vancouver Canucks in Game 7 of the final, they ended a 54-year championship drought. That moment turned MSG into the center of New York hockey celebration. The building has hosted countless Rangers playoff games since, but 1994 remains the reference point. Beyond the Knicks and Rangers, Madison Square Garden has been one of the most important boxing venues in American history. The earlier gardens helped define New York boxing, but the current building also carried that tradition forward. Muhammad Ali fought Joe Frazier in the fight of the century at Madison Square Garden in 1971, one of the most famous sporting events ever held indoors. The arena has also hosted major fights across generations, keeping boxing as part of its identity even as the sport's center of gravity shifted to Las Vegas and pay-per-view venues. College basketball is another major part of the building's story. The Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden became one of the sport's signature annual events. For many fans, the Big East and MSG are almost linked together as a single basketball tradition. The arena gives college games a professional stage feel, and because it sits in New York, the event has always had a media weight that few conference tournaments can match. Then there are the concerts. Madison Square Garden has hosted some of the biggest names in music history: Elvis Presley, Billy Joel, Elton John, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, Bruce Springsteen, Madonna, U2, and many more. Billy Joel's long-running residency at MSG became a modern chapter in the arena's entertainment history. For performers, playing the Garden is still treated as a career milestone. It is not simply another tour stop, it is the New York stage. That is what makes MSG different from many arenas. Plenty of buildings are newer, plenty are more comfortable. Plenty have wider concourses, better loading docks, more natural light, bigger scoreboards, or cleaner exterior design. But few buildings have MSG's event density and cultural memory. Still, the building has real limitations. The exterior is not universally loved. Many architects and preservationists view it as part of the damage done to old Penn Station. The tight urban site makes expansion difficult. The relationship with Penn Station remains unresolved. And while the 2011 to 2013 renovation made the inside far more modern, the basic structure is still from the 1960s. At some point, New York will have to decide whether MSG can keep adapting in place or whether the city needs a larger solution for Penn Station and the surrounding district. That debate is not simple. Moving Madison Square Garden would mean finding another Manhattan site large enough for a major arena, which is extremely difficult. Leaving it where it is keeps the arena in one of the best transit locations in the country, but also keeps pressure on Penn Station redevelopment. Building a new Garden elsewhere would be expensive, politically complicated, and emotionally divisive. Keeping the current Garden means accepting that New York's most famous arena is also one of its most argued over buildings. For now, Madison Square Garden remains exactly where it has been since 1968, above Penn Station, in the middle of Manhattan, carrying the weight of New York sports and entertainment every night the lights come on. And with the Knicks now back in the NBA Finals, the building has another chance to add to its basketball history. Again, nothing should be assumed. The series starts in San Antonio, and the schedule only guarantees that the Knicks' first home finals game is set for Game 3 on June 8th. But that is enough to make the moment feel different. Finals basketball at Madison Square Garden is rare. When it happens, the entire league pays attention. That is the strange power of the Garden. It is not the newest arena. It is not the easiest building to explain. It is tied to one of New York's most painful architectural decisions, and its future remains part of the Penn Station conversation. But after more than half a century in its current location, Madison Square Garden still does what great arenas are supposed to do. It turns a game into an event, and it turns an event into part of the city's memory. For the Knicks, for the Rangers, for boxing, for concerts, and for New York itself, Madison Square Garden remains one of the most important arenas ever built.
And that's our video today on the Madison Square Garden and the history from when the building was conceptualized to what it is today, where potentially things may go, the teams that have played there. Let me know your thoughts and feedback down below. My name is Justin. I'll see you next time on TFC Stadiums.